Testing. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me back here? Now? That's good. Okay. It sounded a little weird last time. I felt like it was too loud. But my ears aren't used to hearing my voice. Yeah. Don't go so far away. I've tried to bring everybody in. So, the announcement I failed to make last time, I won't be making a formal break, so if people need to get up to get some warm water or tea or go to the bathroom or whatever, just feel free to do that on your own to take care of yourself. You're the only sitter. Oh, besides me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming back. I wondered if anyone would, because it was so cold.
Only death would have kept me. That's the advanced course.
So I really appreciated all the input and sharing, the rich sharing from last time. So I'm really looking forward to today too, and I'm glad you're all here. So welcome. So just to recap a little bit, what we in the sharing came up with, things that we wanted out of this class were community and support around the death and dying process, to feel prepared in practical, material, and as well as spiritual ways. Also, how to help others, how to have more open conversations. Also, to help soften our own anxiety around dying, and wanting to know how to be a conscious, active participant as much as we're able. And then general, there's a lot of curiosity about the whole process, and So that's all great. So, and then out of the exercise, people describe good deaths as having to do with the presence of love, peaceful environment, maybe even in nature, feeling fully prepared, and especially having taken care of business with or for our loved ones. Ready with our practices to be able to be present with whatever unfolds, wanting to be there, fully present, to be able to pay attention to prayers, to our thoughts of the Dharma, and want to have supportive items and people around. And our sense of a bad death, thoughts of aggression or being tortured, feeling confused, having no warning, too many distractions, holding hate, feeling separate, non-trusting, and a sense of darkness. So I just wanted to share a little experience that I had at age 19, my near-death experience. It was the first experience I had of a dimension of mind that was beyond and not limited to this body. And I'm just inserting it here just because of that sense of not wanting to be in the presence of aggression and, having a violent death. So when I was 19, I came home from work in the dark, and the house was dark, and back then we didn't lock our doors. I should have that night. Anyway, I came in and subsequently was attacked by a man with a brick who tried to batter in my skull. And so I was knocked to the ground, and he was on top of me and beating my head with a brick. And almost immediately, I went into an experience that felt, no anxiety, no pain. My whole life, well, there wasn't a lot of it at 19, but what there was, virtually every detail of it was reviewed. And then I had the deepest peacefulness and content and sense of love around me. Not really beings, they're sort of formless, and then a sense of, I think the usual sense of light at the end of the tunnel, and at that time, that was the happiest moment in my life. I was totally ready. However, I don't know that it was a being or whatever told me that it was too soon. It wasn't my time. So it must have just taken moments, seconds. There was a timeless aspect to it, and then of course I came back and realized that I had to do something. So I screamed the loudest scream I've ever in my life since and before then, and it worked. Scared him off, and he took off. Anyway, so just that sense of being in the presence of violence, being attacked, there is hope for another dimension of the mind to, which really felt more real than whatever was going on with the body. So interesting. So now I just wondered if there was any more sharing that anyone wanted to do from last time, or during the week, any of the practices, if you did any, or if anyone had anything to bring.
The last exercise we did, I had difficulties with, I guess. I've encountered that concept of you're about to die, how do you feel about your life before you? And while I think there's certainly merit in being attentive to how my life is passing, to have a set of goals and to be constantly saying, is this supporting that goal? Seems to me like much more work and would take all of the life out of living. And so I have trouble with that. And serendipitously, I also have had the feeling that if I were to call my daughter daily and tell her I'm not sure whether I'm going to be alive tomorrow and I want you to know I'm thinking about you, that she'd very quickly get tired of that. But she called me that evening and said, no, I wouldn't. So I haven't done that, but at least I have the assurance that if I did, it wouldn't get very boring very quickly.
Thank you, Peter. Last chance. So, death is a profound teacher and companion. It's really there with us. Every moment could be the last. So it's the one thing, it's the one friend we have. It's always there. And we don't know when it's just going to come and step forward. So its teachings are really all about how to live life fully and meaningfully. When we think about death, then things become more precious, more urgent. So it teaches us to be humble. Death doesn't have favorites. Nobody gets to be special. You don't get to take anything with you except your state of mind. We actually go out more naked than we come in. We don't even have a body. It's just the state of our mind. So, and it teaches us about the impermanence of everything, good, bad, indifferent. Everything passes. And that's really a relief, It's a relief not to have to hang on to everything that feels so important and heavy. And it also teaches us the preciousness of this existence. It's so brief and fragile, and yet this is the opportunity that we have to learn and practice the Dharma, and maybe even get enlightened, or at least a better life. And it reminds us about karma, how every action, every thought, everything we do has a consequence. And if we hold the unbounded view, we carry those into the next life. And so it makes me want to really think carefully about what I'm thinking about and what I'm doing. And then, of course, it teaches us about the futility of samsara and how really there's nothing in this relative existence that can give us lasting happiness. So, thank you, Death, for being there, my teacher and companion, and I know you'll be there with me until the end, so yay. So, I'd like to start out today with the contemplation of the 4 reminders. So this is our motivation for deepening our practice, motivating and supporting us for the bodhicitta aspiration that we would all like to have at the end of our lives, fully with us. So, please get comfortable as you can. Maybe want to close your eyes. Let your body settle and gently bring your attention to your breath. Relax and let yourself be aware of the flow of thoughts, feelings, sensations, temperature of the room, whatever, without getting involved. Just be aware and aware of your breathing. And when you find yourself clinging to thoughts, just return to the breath without feeling any pressure. Just let the thoughts go and return to the breath. So now, having settled into your body, just remember how precious this human life is. During this life, you have encountered so much that has been helpful, including good teachers, the possibility of having a spiritual life, and teachings that inspire and guide you. Many people have helped you, and you've had the joy of helping others. Although you have suffered, you've also had many moments in your life that have been good. So take the time now to appreciate the preciousness of your life, what you might be able to realize through it, and how you may be able to help others as well. Now, contemplate the truth of impermanence. Look at your mind. Every thought and feeling that you have ever had has changed in one way or another. Your body, too, is constantly changing. One day it will die. The Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, all the great teachers of the past have died. Everything in the phenomenal world will change, and one day, sooner or later, will cease to exist. Impermanence is real, and as we know, death is inevitable. So just contemplate this for a few moments. And now, contemplate the truth of cause and effect. You yourself are a result of an endless chain of causes and effects involving your parents and ancestors, stretching back through time. Before your human ancestors, there were animal and plant ancestors. And before the ancestors of mammal and blue-green algae, there were elements. This chain of cause and effect is endless. Your relations are endless, and your past actions are like a shadow that follows you everywhere. Your future is also being laid down at this very moment. Consider that kindness and compassion give rise to good effects, and aggression and greed give rise to suffering. Do what you can to decrease suffering for yourself and others. Realize that you can purify your life by doing good for others and by atoning for the suffering you have caused yourself and others. You can transform this suffering into wisdom. Realize the truth of consequences for a few moments. Finally, consider the truth of suffering. Birth, old age, sickness, death, getting what you do not want, not getting what you do want, and losing that which you cherish. So often you have felt that this or that will make you happy, will finally bring you peace. You might have worked very hard for these things, a good relationship, a nice house, satisfying job. Yet sooner or later you will lose all these things. They themselves can also cause you to suffer. Consider the truth of ill-being and the great benefit of being free of suffering. Contemplate what it would be like to live a life without fear. Know that deathless enlightenment is here at this very moment. Can you relax your grip on what you think is real and open your life to whatever arises? Can you see through the illusion of past, present, and future? Can you let go of the reference points of solidity, identity, and separateness? Can you relax and open to things as they are? Can you plunge into life at this very moment and accept and learn from all of it? Let confidence arise in the truth of the present moment and be there for it. So now, as we come back to the room, so today will be mostly about practical preparedness ideas, and before we move into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the resources that I used. All are tied to our lineage and our spiritual practices. And I'm going to stand up for that. Hello? Good? Yeah, okay. So these are the books, and they're all on the bibliography that I gave you with a little bit of annotation. The main ones that I used were Lama Shinpen Hukam's book, There's More to Dying Than Death, a Buddhist perspective. And there's just lots of good practical things in this from a Buddhist perspective, very easy to read. Dying with Confidence, Anyan Rinpoche, Tibetan Buddhist Guide to Preparing for Death. And this is, is also really good, a little, a lot of the ideas for some of the things coming up today came from this book. This is really a must-read, Being with Death. Joan Halifax is just full of treasures, cultivating compassion and fearlessness in the presence of death. It's a beautiful book, lots of wonderful things, and some of the meditations come from this book. And this Andrew Holczek's book is so complete. It's just practical advice and spiritual wisdom from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Really recommend. It's a great book. And of course, lots of others. Bokar Rinpoche's Death and the Art of Dying, very succinct, goes through the bardos and just very, very sweet and succinct how to die, how to live and die. So I want to give special mention to Ponlap Rinpoche's book, Mind Beyond Death. And this is so complete and so full. This is virtually the entire path and all the bardos. And there's a rumor that we may be treated with teachings by Lama Michael Conklin, a series of teachings based on this book in the future. So you may want to take a peek at it. And it's in the Dharma store. Yes, yes, there are several copies, and more can be had. And let's see. Okay. I think that's all for that. So, preparedness. So there's no recipe for this. It's different for all of us, and there's no way that that we're going to figure all that out in one brief series. So this initial series is meant to provide a beginning, a taste, some ideas for starting, or to enhance our readiness for dying, both materially and spiritually. And of course, those aren't separate. They're really part of the same thing. We can't separate the relative and the ultimate, ultimately. So, I think I pointed this out last time, the preparedness questions. So they're not everybody's questions, but they're meant to help you begin your own list, and that's my practice right now. It's my first step, creating a list of what I think is most important and checking off what I've done and what I have not done, and then to prioritize the remaining goals. The second step for me is to have a container, perhaps a Dharma box, or a binder, or folder, or whatever, someplace where all of it, all of the material, the spiritual, the items, the plans, whatever, can be together in one place, easily accessible to the people you want it to be accessible to, as well as yourself. So you can refine it, update it, take things away, add things to it. And the third step is finding a location for that. A location that is shared with others, that's readily accessible. Recently, we've all been touched by the fires and people suddenly having to leave their homes without gathering things together. So the time of dying can be like that too, may not have much warning. So good to have it in a place that's handy, accessible, and kind of fourthly, maybe in different places. Maybe you have copies of things that you have with your family or Dharma sisters or brothers. So those are my important steps and a possible suggestion for those of you who are like myself trying to get more organized around this. So there's also this little sheet in your handout, the documents for death and dying, and this is this is not comprehensive, and it's not, it's only meant to trigger some thoughts about all the things that are out there. And legal documents, most people have a will, and that again is going to be very individual. A lawyer is not required, but for most people, unless they have very simple estate, etc., will need a lawyer to help them sort through these things. Although nowadays people get these documents online and fill them out. And in fact, I think that's what I did for my last one, and I need to look it over again. And there's such a thing as letter of instruction, which is not a legal document, but this, can include names and contact information of all the people that are involved in your material life, and instructions for your executor. A living will expresses your wishes regarding life-sustaining measures, and there are many templates for this. The Aging with Dignity site has developed the 5 wishes. There's a number of copies over there on the table. It's very nice, complete form. It's interesting. Oregon is one of the few states that still requires you to sign their documentation for it to carry legal weight, but if that's an issue, but this does help your doctor and your healthcare agent to understand and implement your end-of-life care wishes. So advanced directives are written instructions for caregivers that specify what action should be taken if a person is no longer able to make decisions due to illness. So these, as well as your living will, should be readily available and with you and your medical power of attorney as you enter any healthcare facility once you have the potential of the end of your life coming on. Medical power of attorney gives someone the authority to make medical decisions for you when you aren't able to, which is different from a durable general power of attorney, which is a person who will manage your assets when you're no longer able to do so. Another form that I hadn't thought of is proof of ownership, which would be an informal document which essentially lists what you own: homes, bank accounts, loans, debts, vehicles, personal possessions. Might even want to take pictures, of things in your home. Might be helpful. And then on the other side, other documents, ethical will, not a formal document, but maybe a reflection on your life, sharing your deeper views behind your legal documents. And then finally, the spiritual or Dharma will. And this is the opportunity to express your deepest wishes, how you would like to be cared for by your Dharma friends when you're dying, what ceremonies, mantras, prayers you would like to be said before, during, and after death. If you wish your body to remain in place, how it would be cared for. Might include where you would like your ashes, if you're cremated, and what ceremony you might like with that. For instance, some people have had their ashes strewn at a COL. And it might also include your spiritual aspirations, your legacy to KCC, if that's included in your will. So it's good to have that, such a legacy in a separate part of your will. In addition to your material will, just because that may not be read or available, till long after, and it may just help, facilitate people knowing where to go and what to expect. So then, are there anybody want to make comments or questions? I'm just sort of going through what's already in there. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I thought just putting it out there, and for people who are streaming, for your information. Yeah.
thought if we were making a legacy to KC, it had to be in our official will.
Oh, it does, yeah. I'm
Oh.
just saying in addition,
Oh,
it's
in
nice to, it never hurts to duplicate because this will be, this will be well known in advance of, probate or the reading of your will or whatever. Okay. Yeah. It's not a requirement, just a suggestion, that you might want to. Yeah, yeah. So just to read this about the Dharma will and planning for death. Oh, I'm sorry.
Actually, more a procedural question. The place where I have the most questions at this point are in the spiritual Dharma will. And I'm just wondering if we're going to have an opportunity at some point to talk about some possible ways of, creating a ceremony that's meaningful to us. And even
Coming
little
up.
things like things like, I've heard people say they want their bodies to remain in place for 3 days. I'm wondering if we could talk about that at another point, but like what that's about and why 3 days, and I don't know. I have lots of questions around that whole area, so hopefully we'll talk a bit about it.
More is coming up. Okay. So in Tibet, most people die at home, surrounded by their families. And increasingly, this is starting to be the case in America as well, with a return to greater family involvement with the dying process and after-death care. Dharma wills can reflect our aspiration for this involvement of family and Dharma friends and specify our wishes. Basically, it looks like it's just repeating what I said. Okay. So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, practitioners who know they are going to die distribute their wealth to friends and family beforehand. This can actually be beneficial to avoid arguments among family members. But regardless of whether we choose to distribute any wealth we have acquired before our death and after, we should also decide ahead of time what kinds of activities we wish to support. Schools, nunneries, retreat, and Dharma organizations. So this is the very last action we will take, the last karma we will accrue based on our activities in this lifetime. So we should take some time to consider those last acts of charity. At the time of death, we should do everything not only for our own benefit, but for all beings who will be in the bardo when we die, requesting prayers and practices to help liberated beings in the bardo states. Liberating beings in the bardo states is a meritorious act that will go with us on our journey. So the last thing that I will talk about, and then I will turn this over to others who have some more experience in these things. But this book, Dying with Confidence, Anyan Rinpoche talks about the Dharma box, which could contain copies of all your wills, directives, and as well as things like photos, statues, dutsi, mala, tea lights, the various ceremonies, the prayers that you would want available. And so on the back of this page is just a sample checklist in her book about things that you might want to include in that Dharma box. And again, it'd be different for everybody, but it's just, to give us some ideas and things we, might not have thought about. And along with that, there's several pages of her sample end-of-life medical instructions and Dharma will. And The other thing that I've included for you is 2 different, very brief ones, and end-of-life medical instructions and spiritual will that are just 1 page each of them. They're different, different focuses, different priorities, but just to give a little sample of what one could start with. And so, let's see. Okay. So now, Adele Hilson, our good friend and Dharma sister, is going to talk to us about practical planning and some things she's learned from personal experience in a very proactive, organized way of being. She was active on KCC's Development Fundraising Committee for about 10 years. And among her activities on this committee was raising awareness about including KCC in one's estate plan and will. And she's also had experience as the trustee of her parents' affairs. So you're on.
Okay, can you hear me? All right, thank you. Hold it close. So, I feel like the main thing I want to talk about is encouragement and resources. And if you haven't created a will, I encourage you to work on doing that. As someone who I was given the opportunity about 25 years ago to learn that I was the trustee for my parents before they died. So we actually got to have a few brief conversations about their wishes. And it makes it a whole lot easier if you've had some exposure to what it is they'd like to see happen. And it makes it easier for the person carrying out their wishes if you read the documents and have some time to look through it. So that's encouragement number 1. The other is many people within KCC have opted to either name KCC as a beneficiary on an asset or include KCC as part of their estate plan or will. So what that means is it's giving beyond this life and thinking about extending what you could give to KCC after you die. And along those lines, we have what's called a Leave a Legacy Circle. So there's a group of people that have indicated, and many of them are sitting with us right now, who've said, yes, I have KCC in my will. So what that does, from time to time, we might put that list out and make it available, and it can be encouraging for others to see that, oh, my dear neighbor or friend has done this, and I too want to learn how to do it, or I want to be part of this legacy circle. And most nonprofits have some sort of leave a legacy type organization. So if you've done that, I'm grateful, and may you live a long and auspicious life. And the other thing I want to say is through the development committee, the one slice of that is this wills and estate planning. And so in the last 6 months or so, it's gotten reinvigorated, and both Peter Frothingham, Phil, and Linda Grove and I, and if you want to wave your hands so people know who you are, or you can ask a board member if you have questions or you want to know more about this. If you want to know if your name is on the legacy list, so you've done this step but you're not sure if your name is there, let me know, or ask Linda or Peter or Phil. And then in terms of resources, many people who have named KCC in their will have also let me know who their CPA is or their lawyer. So if you are looking for a trusted person and you want to know who else, who are the recommended lawyers in this area that someone I know has used, that might be useful to you as well. And also on our website, if you go to, let's see, where is it? There's areas on our website where there's forms that kind of give you an example of what some of these forms might look like. It's under giving or donate. Somewhere here I've written the steps. Under support. So under support KCC is volunteer and donate. If you click on donate, you'll see things that have to do with bequest language, and other things that might be useful to you, or I can email you any number of these things if you let me know you're interested, or talk to Peter or Linda. That is it. And then if we have time today or next week, because I'm not a lawyer or a CPA, we've created seminars with professionals before. We've done that 3 different times since 2004. So if there was interest in creating some kind of a seminar, we can easily do that, and we usually invite other Dharma groups to come and join us. So let me know if that's something that you would like to see us do. So there'll be more on all this coming in e-newsletters and things like that. And I'm happy to be a resource. I think that becoming organized and doing these things there's some tips and tricks that I've figured out, like saying it out loud. Like Julie just said, these are the 4 things I plan to do. Or when Julie and I met to talk about this, I realized that on this list of emergency care, medical care, one thing I've not done is, even though I've had examples and taken these classes, I've never done the spiritual piece. So I made an agreement with Julie that I would do mine before this class got started. So things, just being accountable to yourself with another person is one of my suggestions. And I have others and other life stories about things that might be beneficial if we have time. Unless there's questions. Oh, part of the resource list has a number of websites, like the Oregon Bar Association. My neighbor lawyer has given me lots of names of recommended people that she knows. There's a couple of books, which I also brought here, that have to do with wills and estate planning. So if any of that is information you'd like to have access to, I'm happy to put it in Julie's notebook, as well as make it available to anyone, any piece of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adele. I forgot to bring the binder today, but yeah. Well, there were some things I wanted to go over in it. Like I have a sample of the Conversation Project, which is, gives some very helpful ways of getting to the difficult conversations with your family and friends.
That reminds me, Julie, in the planning for advanced care, there's several of these over on the table. They talk about the conversation starter, and they also have several examples of healthcare kinds of documents, like medical power of attorney and that kind of thing. And these are all available over there to take with you if you want that kind of resource.
Do people want them now just so you've got them?
There's only like 5 or so, yeah. But I'm sure more are obtainable, really, if people are interested. But mostly for people to look at them. If somebody really wants one, yeah, until they're gone, first come, first serve. Any comments or? Okay, so now our dear friend and Dharma sister, Mary Woods. So Mary's been a hospice nurse for many years, among the uncountable ways she works to help people. She has so much experience with the dying process. And friends have looked to her to help with ceremonies or create ceremonies for them after death. And so she's done some of that, ceremonies, funeral services. And so she's agreed to help today, talking a little bit about ceremonies and rituals after death. And she's, in general, just a great resource about being in the presence of dying death.
Yeah, and I'm probably one of those people that I kind of like talking about it. So I have to be careful about that with some folks because it makes them very uncomfortable. So the first, maybe it wasn't actually the very first time, but the first time I felt like I was kind of instrumental in helping with somebody's funeral was I got a call from a friend of mine's husband his wife had just died. This is a few years ago now. And she'd been a member of KCC and taken refuge and then had an empowerment, but she sort of drifted away, and we'd not exactly lost contact, but kind of. But he called me because he knew that she would want to have something that related to her Buddhist practice. And initially he asked how to get a hold of Lama Michael. And I said, well, that can be a little tricky, so let me see what I can do. So in this case, my first step was to talk to Bill and Dora, and then they gave me some suggestions about how we might proceed. So this is what I came up with, and then from that I came up with some kind of more general stuff, and they made enough that you guys can take it home, and it'll give you some other ideas. But we talked about like what is there a practice that she would identify with, and she had a Chenrezig empowerment. And so we thought, okay, we'll do the short Chenrezig in Tibetan since it'll be a really mixed group. The other limiting factor was this was going to be at the Willamette Military Cemetery. And I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral there, but you're very circumscribed on your time frame. You have 20 minutes, period. And then you better be done. So we had to be kind of organized, and I had help from a bunch of different people that helped, that brought different things. Like her husband brought a statue and her mala. I brought a cloth. I have Bonnie, she brought some things too. I think Melinda brought a bell. So we assembled these things, and we literally created a beautiful little shrine in less than 5 minutes. So we can pass this around. So in a way, I want us to reassure you that even if you didn't have something detailed yourself, written out for yourself, if your family knows who to talk to, and they can probably get some assistance creating something. However, if you have the opportunity to sort of plan it yourself, that could be extremely helpful to family members. My mother planned her whole funeral while she was dying, and it was a beautiful funeral. So, but you don't have to wait that long, is what we all know. So the things when I was looking at what we did, and I thought what were good things for me to look back on, like if I was going to do this again, or helping at other times when I have, is first thing I want you to think, here are some suggestions, but don't get too hung up about everything happening a particular way, as often things will play out in remarkable ways despite any unexpected obstacles, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen or where you're going to die or any of that. So if you have some parameters, that can be helpful, like where would you like your funeral to be? Would you like it to be here? Would you like it to be at your house? Is it going to be at a funeral home? Somebody asked about the 3 days, and for myself, that's something I wouldn't have my family get hung up about, but it can happen. There was one Sangha member that they did keep his body for 3 days on ice at a funeral home. And I mean, the funeral home wasn't one that was necessarily like a Buddhist funeral home, but funeral homes are happy to do whatever you want as long as you know what you want. So that's the whole trick. They were happy to help create the space, but you had to tell them we need this, this, and this. And I don't know if Lodro had to provide the ice or how that happened, but there was like dry ice involved in keeping this body preserved because he was going to be cremated later. So he was not embalmed. Oregon laws are pretty open about how long you can keep a body. Generally 24 hours is kind of the limit, keeping it at home. Bear in mind that if you're going to donate organs, your body is going to be touched right shortly after death.
12 hours. Yeah. I think it's 12 hours is the max.
Yep. So, and the more teachers that I've read, like Sogyal Rinpoche, have said, this is actually really good karma. It can be because you're being generous, even after death, with what's left of your body. So it's sort of a personal decision, all of these things, but for me it was reassuring that is, for some people it may be a very important part of their spiritual practice, and for others maybe not. So, and also you have to think about how comfortable are your family around some of these more esoteric practices. So things to bear in mind in the parameters. Okay. If you can ahead of time, it'd be good to designate a person for your family to call when you have died that would be helping coordinate these things. So think about if there's a Dharma friend that would be willing to help orchestrate this, especially if you've had some things written down, like I want this practice, I'd like to have this, this, this. That will help them in doing it. They'll just basically have to put the pieces together. When we began Linda's service, we began it with just a simple welcoming everybody that was there, a brief description of the practice that we were going to be done, basically that it was a compassion practice. I was fortunate to have Bill and Dora basically leading the practice, and that felt better to me to not have to be the one doing that. And everybody that was there, and we were the Buddhists there. Everybody else, and there was quite a few people, were just all over the map. They found it extremely moving, even though we did it in Tibetan. It was very meaningful to them. And afterwards, the family actually did make a donation to KCC, and one of her children bought flowers to the Dharma Center. So they were very touched and grateful that we were, community of friends were able to help. So it was not an obstacle for them that they didn't know us. So we did the Chenrezig practice. Other thoughts I had at the time were maybe the Dewa Chen prayer, maybe the Four Immeasurables. We didn't have enough time for those things, so we didn't do those. We did read a poem. I did read a poem at the end called Gone From My Sight, which they'll be included in the handouts you get. It's a beautiful poem. And at some services, this was not one of them, is often people will have a time to get up and say a remembrance about the deceased, which can be, when I've been at funerals when that was done, I thought it was very sweet and comforting, and offered some poignant moments, and helped the family know and their other loved ones that there were other people that loved them, and maybe knew things about them that they didn't. So, okay. And I would also just say, too, that should be a planned thing. I think it's generally not appropriate to just people spontaneously get up in a funeral and say things. I'm sure that happens. At the end of the the service, we dedicated the merit, but that was sort of at the end of the Chenrezig practice anyway, but we used the dedication. But I would say to any service, like I would know if I was having one, I would want some kind of dedication. And let's see. I've also have had them print up something that was some things I found that I've kind of gathered online over time, and a Buddhist funeral service rituals and customs. Most of the ones you find online are probably Theravadan or Mahayana Zen practices. Often they'll say everybody wears white. So far at any funerals I've been to for KCC members, we haven't all worn white. So I think that's more of an Asian custom. I think that's their color for the sign of sorrow, I think is what I was reading recently. If you're going to an Asian funeral, don't wear red because that's a joyful color. So I thought that was interesting. Then they had some interesting suggestions about things that you might do that I thought were kind of beautiful. You might walk with sticks to symbolize that grief has left them the need for support. Chant or sing appropriate sutras. Bring offerings of flowers and fruit. Burn incense to sweeten the air. Ring gongs or bells. And let's see, anything else like that? And then I put some links on here too that you could look up that had more things about a Buddhist death and other rituals. And it was, to me, just gives you an idea of the possibilities. This could be something that could be very meaningful for your family and friends and give them a time to practice too. So those are the kind of things for myself I would bear in mind. Since we're all preparing for this, what a nice gift to give to those that we leave behind, to have some of these things figured out and make it to be not only a time to remember, but also a time to sort of connect with their own spiritual centers. So I don't know if you have any questions. We don't have enough time today to talk about all the things about what happened during the dying process. But the main thing I will say about that, and you'll saw it universally, I haven't seen anything I've read anywhere that said anything else, is that the main thing is to keep the environment peaceful. And I've actually handwritten on my advance directive that if anybody is very upset, I do not want them in my presence. I'd like to have them taken somewhere else and treated kindly and comforted. But I'm doing something. And I think I even said that there. I'm doing something. So yeah, I think it's okay to be clear. And you get these forms, you can write on it. You don't have to just check the boxes. You can write on it. You can add another piece of paper. My advance directive, I have one in my safe, but my sister has a copy because she's my healthcare representative if my husband isn't able to, and I have a copy of hers. So I'd say make sure that the person who's going to be representing you actually has that, so they don't have to be going to get it somewhere else.
And maybe even have a backup person or two.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
In case they're not available.
Right. So, and as we've been doing this, I've been thinking, things that I haven't done. So I think that, we all have work to do.
If I may add a couple thoughts. When my father died, I knew that there were people who knew him in different ways than our children did, and I would have liked to have a part of his obituary, an invitation for people to send any remembrances they wanted to the family. Unfortunately, my sisters didn't agree with that, so it didn't happen. But for myself, I've lived separately from my children for many years, and so I'd like to have, as a part of any published obituary, that invitation so that my children, who haven't had an opportunity to know the people who've been in my life for many years, would have an opportunity to have that kind of information. And a personal thing that has come from my being to a number of funerals because of having also worked with hospice is a part of my instructions from my service is that anyone who's there should have a name tag saying who they are and how they know me, because I've been to lots of services where I don't know who these people are, and if I'm going to talk to them or learn anything more about the person who has died, it would be helpful to know what their relationship with is. So those are two of my personal experiences and biases.
Be sure you include those in your spiritual will.
I think it'll be okay with Peter if I share this brief story. We were at SCOL a year and a half or so ago, and the conversation came up, where did we want our ashes scattered? And people were naming the places. And so subsequent to that conversation, Peter and I have gone to the trail where he'd like his ashes scattered, and I said to him, I think we should do this every year so that I don't forget, and we probably ought to bring other people to this place. But it also feels very honoring of our friendship and our knowing one another and normalizing death and all those things. So
Yeah.
it's an honor to go to that trail, and we need to set a date.
Thank you.
I just wanted to introduce an alternative way of managing your body on death. Cremation has been mentioned, but natural burial is also a real possibility. There are some cemeteries that are doing that now. We've actually arranged for it at Riverview, and seems like a really great way to
Ecological.
honor the body and very ecologically sound. Yeah. Well, rather than have your body embalmed and put in a concrete case and put in the ground where it's supposed to be there forever, basically you just put your body in the ground. But it is, you would have either a shroud or you have any kind of a box that can decompose with you, so your body just decomposes and the way every other body does on death. So it's, it's both more ecologically sound, and to me it feels more, I don't know, like in community with life. Or natural burial. Natural burial.
Did you have something?
I just had a quick question. In Colorado, we had identified some funeral homes which would work closely with things that we wanted done, like keeping the body for 3 days and such. Has anyone here identified any funeral directors who would understand what we want?
Well, again, I think that, well, the one that we used, I think, was in the Brooklyn neighborhood, and I can't remember the name of it now, but my impression is that and I've worked in hospice in this area for a while, this question came up a lot. I don't know that there's any specific funeral home. The one place I think that might be a good place to ask, actually, is the Buddhist temple, the big Chinese community in Portland. Since they've been together for like about 100 years now, they may be a resource for finding that out. But because the population is changing, and there's quite a few Asians that have moved to America that are various different ethnic Buddhist traditions, I'm thinking that a lot of them are getting pretty go with the flow on that kind of thing. So I'm guessing that this is becoming more common, that they're having to deal with these different traditions. But But the people I know that have done it, like when we did it for my friend, we just basically had to know what we wanted to do. And for Greg, I know that Lodro at the time did a lot with orchestrating his funeral and making it happen.
I would guess that the Shambhala community here might know too. They're pretty advanced in terms of their caring for the dying and dead.
Yeah, I think it's worth some research, and I think that, well, I know that Dharma Rain used the Omega, whatever it is, service. It's out on the east edge of town. It might be the same one. And I think one of the things there was that with Kyogen's, so there's, funerals and there's memorial services. So a funeral when the body is recently dead, and that was the case in that what I'm talking about with Kyogen was that they had a place where you could do a service, and right adjacent was the crematorium. And so that's unusual because some crematoria are like off in somewhere. And so if you're wanting the body to, to be able to have an actual funeral service and then go to a crematorium, then I know that one is there. But anyway, what we learned in our last Death and Dying last year about new processes that are even greener than, one trouble with the natural burial is they're being done by funerals, and so they're still taking up land, for you to be there, to have your spot. And so if everybody does that, someday we'll run out of land. But it's not too bad because there's not a bunch of junk in there. But there is another method that's coming on, which is more like a composting of the body. And I can't remember what you're left with in the end. Not much. Something.
Teeth.
Yeah, something. Maybe somebody remembers.
It's coming.
You sure?
Well, just to add one thing, I think it was Greg where they let us watch the burning. They opened the chamber and let us look at the fire and the body being burned. And I thought that was so powerful. In addition to being able to sit beside it, it was just so amazing to be a witness to that.
Was that Omega? I don't know. I kind of think it was. Maybe so.
It inspires me to tell my own story if I can, and that is about my mother, who happened to die in Anchorage, Alaska, and she was physically disabled but bright as could be in her mind. Thank you, Carolyn, for knowing my mother. Anyway, after her death, a decision eventually got made to cremate her body. All she wanted to be was buried or located with my father. She didn't say what form it had to be in. So what ended up happening is I went to the crematory, and they brought her body in, and I had two friends with me, thank goodness, and there's sort of this cart, and they say, "Let us know when you're ready." I say yes. They open the big giant door, they tip the body, they pour her body in, they shut the door, they turn on the lever, and you hear the start. And my friends and I sat on the floor and did some readings out of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it was an extraordinary experience that I would really offer and encourage anyone to do with a loved one, because that moment when she departed her body was as clear as a bell. Because one of the things, my most beautiful story is that because of her disability, she wasn't able to sing for 40 years. And I could tell the white energy moving, and I could hear her singing. That's when I knew she'd left her body. But it was a fascinating thing. I had no idea where the crematory was, for one thing, and that you could do something that simple and request it. And so anyway, it's just a great story.
Thank you.
to go back to just prior to death, if we could, for a second. One of the things that Anyan Rinpoche used to encourage us to do was to form groups of Dharma sisters and brothers who would commit to supporting each other through the dying process. And I thought that that was such a good idea. You know, there would be maybe 5 or 6 people, and you would make a binder for each of them with the prayers that you wanted done. And they would all be called, and 5 or 6, because by that point maybe 2 or 3 have moved on, or, you know, aren't home or on vacation or whatever when you die, so that there would be enough of a group there. And I thought that that was a really good way to deal with making sure that you get to do the practices that you want to do, that you and your Dharma community know well while you're dying, is to actually have a group that says, I will come there and do them with you.
Let's make it happen. Yes, it's a great idea. I vote for a brief break. I need one. And you're welcome to look at the materials on the table and take whatever you might want, but not the books, please. But you can look at them.